We live in scary times. All countries are arming up, misinformation is rife, and climate change deniers have changed their stance from "it doesn't exist" to, well, it's too late to do anything about it now. And if you're triggered by me merely saying that, and are frantically hammering away at your keyboard to tell me that they're saying this just to wear us down and to make us give up hope, just ask yourself, where did that stance come from? Did you form it yourself, or did you just read it from a dozen different places before? Do you think those comments were generated by people? It doesn't matter. We're all part of the hive mind now. Almost every day, a new technology comes along that threatens to change life forever. Blockchain, for instance. It had its fun with the currencies. Then there was that whole NFT debacle. It seems like people lump blockchain onto everything, as if it's somehow going to solve all our problems. And then there's AI. Computers training computers to get better at not being computers, resulting in immensely elaborate neural networks that we humans cannot understand, yet it can somehow output data indistinguishable from that of human-created content. I've been covering a rather basic image generation model, yet even these have a distinctly dreamlike quality to them. I covered an AI-generated speech program too, but you wouldn't know that because nobody watched those videos. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. For behind the scenes, I was experimenting with it. One of the things I did was to respond to people on this channel with AI-generated responses. What was said doesn't really matter. It seemed kind of argumentative, sometimes a bit random, but what matters is that nobody realised that I was doing it. Simply by having my username respond to people was enough to make them think it was me responding to them. And why wouldn't it? Nobody expects somebody to AI generate responses. Not even from me, an upscaling addict. Merely words associated with my profile name on YouTube is enough to pass as it being me. But don't you see what's terrifying about that? Because I realise that I may be giving other AI generated messages the same benefit of the doubt. There are billions and billions of comments made online, on social media, on sites like Reddit, on sites like YouTube. Do we honestly think that all those are human generated? Well, of course they aren't. We get the spam bots and we get the obvious cases, but as I was replying to people on YouTube with AI generated stuff, I got a horrible, nagging feeling that something wasn't right. There's that story going around about that Google engineer who was convinced the AI he was talking to was real and sentient. There are a lot of doubts about that story that you're no doubt hammering away at the keyboard to tell me about, but I don't know. If the free AI tools online can half manage it, then why can't Google's latest and greatest? So yeah, I've got a rough idea of what is required to break current AI tools that I've been talking to. It puts up a good fight, and frequently scares me with the breadth and depth of its knowledge, and its frightening ability to sustain a coherent conversation. Those responses scared me for the obvious reasons. From now on, we've got to consider the possibility that any message that we read online could be written by AI. But it was the broken and slightly incoherent responses of older AI tools which also scared me. The ones which sounded like they were translated from another language, or where it seemingly lost track of what had been said, getting immediately sidetracked and changing the narrative on a dime. Because I realise I've been giving those sorts of comments the benefit of the doubt for years already. Even with primitive, beginner-level AI responses, their context has caused me to pass them off as still being from a human, to assume that there have been human reasons for their sorts of behaviours, and that many of these AI-generated comments may already have influenced my emotions and behaviours. How many hours of my life have been wasted responding to AI systems that don't think or feel? That long, thoughtful response I produced to that person with a problem of some sort, which I assumed had been typed by somebody with English as a third language. What if it was just a bot trying to get enough rep on YouTube to bypass Google's bot checks? And what if my response had helped with that? Or what about that nasty character who endlessly argued with me about something they clearly knew nothing about? That profile that got me angrily passionate about a subject because I knew for a fact that they were wrong. When that person started lying and fabricating facts to give his argument reason, maybe it wasn't a sly attempt at manipulation, but was just AI getting stuff a bit wrong. And to think, I bothered to get invested and angry about that one too. Or what about that nice comment that made me feel happy? How would I feel if I knew it was just a generic response from a bot that was only there to spout propaganda about something several years later? What if AI has wasted a sizable chunk of my life already? Maybe you're thinking this doesn't matter. Maybe all that matters is that I think they're real and feel that my interactions with them have purpose and lasting consequences. Them being AI might not mean that they don't, but it definitely changes what those interactions mean. And I feel like I'm being manipulated. Because if these things were bots, then they were created for a purpose, either to manipulate me or to use the comments they've generated already to mask their future and more sinister intentions. And to think we saw the AI revolution as being up ahead of us, when I realise now it could have been here for years already. And even with clearly broken and stupid messages, I still assumed that they had been typed by humans. Broken and stupid human beings maybe, but humans nonetheless. AI could already be living among us. It's my worst nightmare, and it's YouTube's comment section right now. So while I'm out there, AI generating comments for my amusement, there are no doubt others out there doing it for more sinister reasons. Train an AI to subtly criticize something from time to time, create a million YouTube accounts with that particular behaviour, and suddenly you've created a popular viewpoint. I've long found it suspicious, the barrage of hatred on every video that features Bill Gates. Is this just a load of Facebook mums getting angry enough to post on YouTube using their pictureless profile accounts? Or are all these comments AI driven by the anti-vax movement, in an obvious attempt to give their viewpoints validity by giving the impression there are millions who already agree with them? Or worse still, is the mastermind behind this somebody else, with even more obtuse motives that we can't possibly know just yet? People on Reddit are given the top posts, which is okay, as long as the top posts represent what people think, rather than what a popular AI thinks. With enough accounts and enough upvotes, you can manipulate the conversation. And more terrifyingly, that then manipulates what real people viewing the conversation think. Morbius is a bad movie. But look on Reddit and you may instead see it as a dank shitpost that everybody is constantly referencing, shoehorning the term morbing into conversations every 5 seconds, no matter where on the site you are. Seeing it being talked about everywhere in such a viral way, you may be inclined to think that the movie has some sort of value, or even to watch it. Even if the source of all this memery was birthed unnaturally by a devious guerrilla marketing attempt. Which of course I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure it was all naturally driven by the internet's love of endlessly talking and promoting literally every Marvel thing ever made ever, no matter what, nor how bad. But say, for instance, in the future at some point that a bad movie comes out and looks to be a box office failure, and fearing that they won't even recoup the costs of production, the studio behind the movie turns to an alternative marketing strategy. Instead of trying to get people to watch it by making it look good, what if they instead just try to turn it into a popular internet meme? Just look at Shrek and its continued popularity. In this day and age, what you'd need to do would be to start off with a few thousand fake social media accounts mentioning the movie's name in a memey way in every popular conversation going. Then when real people begin doing it, it becomes a self-perpetuating loop. It looks organically driven, and a movie that would otherwise have been a box office flop suddenly gets hundreds of millions of dollars worth of promotion and marketing for free. Crisis averted. For the movie studio, at least. But making and sustaining all of these fake thousands of social media accounts is time-consuming and costly itself. And it can't just be new accounts spouting this stuff either. That's way too suspicious. It needs to come from accounts that are months or even years old, and with a credible-looking post-history. That stuff takes time, planning, and effort, which itself can be costly. And sure, you can outsource that work to offices of Chinese workers or children in Thailand or whatever, but what if there was an even cheaper way of doing this? What if you could somehow get a computer to auto-generate vaguely coherent-sounding comments? Good enough to slip by the bot detection nets. Good enough to keep these accounts churning out worthless but human-sounding comments for months on end, until their moment of need, at which point they're reconfigured to shoehorn the movie's name, let's say CORNIUS, into every conversation imaginable. Now I'm sure this sort of thing has never happened and never will. Certainly not for something as silly as a box office flop, and definitely not for important things like, say, politics. That would be too terrible to imagine. Imagine a few people using a massive network of AI accounts to subtly manipulate our thoughts and feelings via memes, half-truths, or simply through a continual bombardment of misinformation. It could undermine the foundations of a democratic society. But what if? We need to be ready for this, and to assume that everything may have a darker meaning behind it. These days on YouTube, I'm getting more and more people accusing me of shilling something whenever I speak positively about anything. There was a time online when you could just talk fondly about an experience or a game of some sort and it was taken as that. But now, there has to be a darker reason behind it. I assumed all this cynicism was just the internet getting nastier and more critical, but maybe it's people trying to defend themselves from misinformation and from subtle marketing attempts by immediately assuming that everything must be. This isn't nice, it isn't healthy, and yet I'm not sure what else people can do to shield themselves from misinformation. I'm not sure if even this is shielding themselves from the real manipulation that's going on behind the scenes. But be warned, going down this path will make you paranoid. What if everybody's an AI? Who knows what sort of long-term impact their influence will have on you, no matter how resistant you think you are to that sort of trickery. I don't think AI has become sentient, but it's already reached the capabilities of your average social media post. And maybe that's enough. I went off on a bit of a rant on Twitter, not about AI-generated text, but this time it was about AI-generated imagery. People keep on telling themselves that they can see if something's been created by AI, as if that's going to protect them. You can't trust yourself to be able to detect it anymore, and it will be used maliciously. whether the good guys use it or not. And people who want to believe stuff is true will convince themselves it is, even if, deep down, even they have their doubts. On this channel, when I upscale a particularly low resolution or blobby image, people call me out on it. But that doesn't mean you can always spot upscales, because while you spotted that particularly obvious upscale, you missed the dozen or so other images from that video that were also upscaled, but done more subtly. The reality is, AI is here and it's getting good. Good enough to trick you unless you're told specifically beforehand that what you're seeing is AI generated. Then it's easy to spot 100 things that are wrong with it, even if it turns out it actually wasn't AI generated. The conclusion I have reached is, Pandora's box has been opened. It will continue to improve and it will be used in every way possible. I personally think the good guys should get ahead of all this by showing the world how it could be used in every way possible. You can't trust the picture of Boris Johnson in a tub of baked beans because it could be fake. It might not be. So when you see a picture of the president strangling a cat, rather than to try and explain to the believers how it's fake, the best response is probably just to generate another image showing him strangling a dog, or a child, or a dragon, just to prove that this sort of proof is no longer proof. What we need now is a better way of verifying what is real. Don't ask me how we're going to do that, but it will need to be done. Blockchain, perhaps.